They came like a storm, slicing through the skies over occupied Europe, a threat that no British pilot had truly faced before. In 1941, reports began filtering back from the continent about a new German fighter, faster, stronger, more heavily armed than anything the Royal Air Force had encountered. This was the FW-190, a plane that would unsettle even the most seasoned pilots and force the RAF to confront a sudden shift in the balance of power over the skies. It was not merely another aircraft. It was a challenge to everything the British fighter arm believed it knew about air combat. For pilots of the RAF, the summer and autumn of 1940 had been a baptism by fire. The Battle of Britain had tested men and machines alike, and the victory, while decisive, had come at a cost. Pilots knew they had fought with skill, courage, and a sense of determination that could rival the Luftwaffe. Among those pilots, one man stood apart, Douglas Bader. His story was already legendary, and it embodied the audacity and resilience of a nation under siege. Bader had endured what few men could imagine. In peacetime, a flying accident had left him with both legs amputated. Many would have accepted this as the end of a flying career, yet he refused to bow to circumstance. Through sheer determination, he learned to walk on prosthetics, and when war came, he returned to the cockpit. By 1940, he was flying Spitfires again, leading squadrons in some of the most dangerous air battles over France and Britain. His reputation grew, not just for his skill as a pilot, but for his ability to inspire those around him. Pilots under his command often spoke of a rare mixture of fearlessness and meticulous discipline, a combination that would be tested in ways no one could yet imagine. By 1941, Bader had been promoted to acting wing commander at RAF Tangmere, leading multiple squadrons in daylight fighter sweeps over occupied France and escort missions for bombers striking at German targets. The RAF was adapting, refining its strategies, and learning from every sortie. The men in the cockpits knew the strengths and limitations of their machines. They understood the performance of the Spitfire and Hurricane intimately, and they had devised tactics to exploit the weaknesses of the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf 109s. There was a confidence, a sense that, while dangerous, the war in the air could be managed through skill, coordination, and courage. Then came the whispers of the FW-190. At first, it was nothing more than a rumor. A new German fighter, seen over France and Belgium, described as faster than the Spitfire, with heavier armament and a more robust engine. Pilots returning from reconnaissance missions spoke of encounters that defied their expectations. The FW-190 appeared suddenly, striking with ferocity that seemed almost engineered to unsettle its adversaries. The very first reports from Allied intelligence suggested that it was a plane capable of outclimbing, outturning, and outfiring the British fighters. In the months that followed, this whisper hardened into an undeniable reality. The FW-190 was here, and it changed the rules of engagement. The FW-190 was unlike the Bf 109, which, for all its effectiveness, had well-known limitations. The FW-190 featured a radial engine that was more robust and less vulnerable to damage. Its frame was stronger and could absorb hits that would have grounded other fighters. Early versions were equipped with 4 machine guns, but later iterations would carry twin 20mm cannons, capable of devastating bombers and any fighter that dared close within range. Its combination of speed, climb rate, and roll agility meant that British pilots could no longer rely on traditional tactics to win engagements. Every sortie carried new uncertainty, and the stakes were suddenly higher. For Douglas Bader and his men, the arrival of the FW-190 was a psychological as well as tactical shock. Pilots are trained to respect their enemies, but the FW-190 demanded more than respect. It demanded rapid adaptation and constant vigilance. Reports began circulating among squadrons. Pilots described being surprised in dives, outpaced in turns, and hit with a level of accuracy that was unfamiliar. The RAF leadership began reassessing engagement strategies, considering whether existing formations and approaches were sufficient. The FW-190 was not just another aircraft to contend with. It represented a dangerous evolution in air warfare. Bader's personal reaction, as recorded in after-action reports and the reflections of his contemporaries, shows a blend of concern and calculated determination. He understood that fear alone would not protect his men, and he knew that hesitation in the sky could be fatal. The FW-190 was capable of devastating a Spitfire in seconds if caught unprepared, but also revealed weaknesses: moment of vulnerability during tight turns, initial climb delays, and the challenges of high-altitude operations. Bader and other leaders began training their pilots to exploit these weaknesses, but the learning curve was steep and the cost of error was severe. The human element in all of this cannot be overstated. Men in the cockpit are more than machines of war. They feel fear, they process risk, and they act under pressure. Bader's leadership was instrumental in guiding that psychology. He emphasized discipline, situational awareness, and aggressive but intelligent action. Pilots who had flown in Tangmere squadrons reported that Bader's calm, unwavering presence gave them confidence, even in the face of superior enemy aircraft. His ability to inspire was as critical as any technical briefing, because morale and cohesion are often the difference between survival and disaster in air combat. The FW-190 also reshaped the broader strategic picture. Bomber escorts now face a more lethal threat. Daylight raids require revised coordination, and intelligence had to continually track production numbers, deployment locations, and combat effectiveness. RAF intelligence officers studied every report, debriefed every pilot, and attempted to predict where and how the FW-190 would strike next. The stakes of air supremacy were now higher, and the margin for error had shrunk dramatically. By late 1941, skirmishes over France began to reveal patterns. FW-190s engaged in sweeps to disrupt British operations, and encounters with RAF fighters showed the aircraft's capacity to dominate the initial stages of combat. Spitfires often had to rely on tactical ingenuity, surprise, and coordinated attacks to survive. Even seasoned pilots, those with years of experience, found themselves adapting on the fly, learning through observation, and sometimes paying with their lives. For Bader, these encounters were not merely reports or statistics. They were the reality his men faced every day. The arrival of the FW-190 also affected pilot behavior in subtle ways. Flight paths, altitude choices, and engagement timing all changed. Pilots became more cautious, more analytical, and more attuned to subtle cues in the sky. The shadow of a plane, a sudden dive, a roar of an engine. It was a war not only of firepower, but perception, timing, and the instincts honed through experience. Bader's command emphasized this adaptation, turning fear into actionable strategy without quelling the aggressive spirit that had defined RAF success. What is striking about this period is the intersection of innovation, courage, and human response. The FW-190 was a technological marvel for its time, but also revealed the limits of existing tactics and the necessity of continuous learning. Pilots were forced to confront the reality that skill alone could not guarantee survival. Understanding the enemy's machine, predicting its behavior, and reacting instantly became critical. Bader's own experience as a pilot, overcoming personal adversity and mastering the Spitfire, gave him insight into these dynamics. His leadership combined practical instruction with an understanding of human resilience under extreme stress. Even as pilots trained and strategies evolved, the psychological weight of facing the FW-190 lingered. Reports from early encounters often spoke of a fleeting moment of panic, a hesitation that could be fatal. Bader worked tirelessly to prepare his men for that mental challenge, knowing that confidence and courage, properly focused, could offset some of the technical advantages of the FW-190. It was a battle of nerves as much as skill, and he understood that the human element could never be ignored in the calculus of combat. The FW-190's arrival in 1941 marked a turning point not because it was invincible, but because it forced the RAF, pilots and leaders alike, to confront the evolving nature of war. The aircraft itself became a measuring stick, revealing strengths and weaknesses, challenging assumptions, and compelling rapid adaptation. Bader, as one of the leading figures in the RAF, exemplified the response that was necessary, a combination of careful study, practical action, and unwavering resolve. The men who flew under him learned that survival required not only technical skill, but a clear mind, rapid assessment, and the courage to act decisively under fire. This moment in history, the first reports and encounters with the FW-190, encapsulate a pivotal phase in the air war over Europe. It is a story of adaptation, courage, and leadership in the face of unexpected technological change. For Bader and his squadrons, it was a challenge that tested every lesson they had learned and demanded new levels of innovation and bravery. The skies above France, Belgium, and later deeper into occupied Europe will become a proving ground, where tactics, courage, and the limits of human endurance were tested against the most formidable new fighter of the era. The arrival of the FW-190 was not merely a technical event. It was a human drama played out at 20,000 feet in the roar of engines and the smoke of cannon fire. It shaped decisions on the ground, influenced command strategy, and forced pilots to confront their fears and instincts in ways few had previously imagined. Douglas Bader, with his unique blend of resilience, leadership, and tactical insight, became a figure central to navigating this new reality. His response exemplifies the kind of leadership and courage that allowed the RAF to adapt, survive, and eventually turn adversity into strategic advantage. As 1941 progressed, every mission carried the weight of this new threat. Every flight over enemy territory was a test, not only of machine versus machine, but human skill, leadership, and ingenuity. The FW-190 had arrived, and with it, a new era in the air war, one that demanded respect, study, and extraordinary courage. The men who faced it, led by figures like Bader, were forced to rise to the occasion, rewriting the playbook of air combat under pressure and shaping the course of the war in ways that would echo long after the first encounters over France. The stage was now set for the first true clashes, where speed, firepower, and tactical brilliance would collide with human courage and adaptability. The story of those early months, the encounters, the debriefings, the lessons learned, is one of suspense, uncertainty, and the extraordinary resilience of men who refused to be beaten by fear or circumstance. This is where the tale of the FW-190 truly begins, and where the human spirit in the sky would meet one of the most formidable machines of the Second World War. The first confirmed sighting of the FW-190 over occupied France was more than just a reconnaissance report. It was a spark of alarm that spread through the RAF. Pilots described seeing a new fighter that seemed to move with unnatural ease, its radial engine producing a low, powerful rumble that hinted at strength and reliability. The plane's presence over Europe sent ripples through intelligence offices and squadron mess halls alike. For those who had flown against BF-109s, the FW-190 was different. Faster in dives, more maneuverable at medium altitudes, and heavily armed with cannons that could punch through even the most durable British bombers. The technical specifications alone were enough to make a seasoned fighter pilot pause, but the reality of combat would make them confront fear in a tangible way. Reports trickled in from pilots who had encountered the FW-190 in the early months of 1941. A flight returning from a routine sweep over northern France might see a silhouette diving from the clouds, a shadow with wings, and recognize too late that it was unlike anything they had faced. Spitfires would attempt to climb to meet the threat, only to find that the FW-190 could outpace them in certain flight regimes. Maneuvers that had been second nature against BF-109s suddenly seemed insufficient. Pilots described moments where the enemy fighter appeared almost to anticipate their moves, striking with deadly precision and vanishing before they could react. It was this combination of mechanical superiority and tactical aggression that made the FW-190 a game-changer. Douglas Bader and other RAF commanders took these reports seriously. They convened debriefings and analysis sessions, poring over every detail of engagements, altitude performance, climb rates, armament, and the new fighter's agility. The FW-190's introduction forced the RAF to reconsider its tactical doctrine. Daylight bombing raids, previously defended by Spitfire escorts, now face a far more lethal adversary. Even routine patrols over occupied territory demanded heightened vigilance. Bader emphasized that understanding the enemy was as critical as flying skill, that pilots needed to know the FW-190's strengths and exploit its weaknesses to survive. One key factor became immediately apparent. The FW-190's radial engine was a formidable advantage. Unlike the liquid-cooled engines of the BF-109 and the Spitfire, the FW-190's engine could absorb more damage and continue flying. This durability allowed German pilots to adopt more aggressive tactics, knowing their machines could withstand hits that might cripple other fighters. Reports from early engagements describe British fighters attempting head-on attacks against FW-190s, only to be met with concentrated firepower that left them scrambling. The danger was real, the consequences immediate, and the lessons were bitterly learned. At the same time, pilots began noting that the FW-190, while fast and powerful, had its vulnerabilities. High-altitude performance lagged slightly behind that of the Spitfire, and tight turns at low speeds could sometimes allow an experienced RAF pilot to gain the upper hand. These nuances became the foundation of new RAF tactics. Bader, drawing on his own combat experience and keen understanding of human behavior in extreme situations, trained his pilots to exploit these weaknesses. Engagement became a delicate balance of aggression and caution, a psychological dance in which split-second decisions could mean life or death. The human side of these encounters was profound. Pilots under Bader's command faced not only the mechanical superiority of the FW-190, but also the psychological weight of being suddenly outclassed. Reports and memoirs from the period describe heightened tension, rapid heartbeat, and a sense of the unknown as each flight took off. Men learned quickly that hesitation could be fatal, that instinct alone was insufficient, and that careful observation, split-second decision-making, and reliance on comrades were now critical. The FW-190 demanded mental, as well as physical agility. Bader himself was acutely aware of this dynamic. He emphasized squadron cohesion and communication, encouraging pilots to operate as a unit rather than as individuals. During patrols and sweeps, formation flying became more rigid, debriefings more detailed, and tactics more sophisticated. Pilots would often take turns baiting FW-190s into positions where other squadron members could engage. The lessons learned in these engagements would ripple through the RAF, shaping the response to German air power for the rest of the war. Interesting technical details of the FW-190 also caught the attention of engineers and intelligence officers. The aircraft's wing design allowed for remarkable roll rates, making it exceptionally nimble in combat. Its heavy cannons could devastate bombers from medium range, and the radial engine's robustness offered survivability unmatched by many contemporary fighters. Reconnaissance photographs confirmed the presence of these armaments and structural reinforcements, and the RAF began adjusting aircraft designs, ammunition loads, and combat tactics in response. Every new report, every observation, was cataloged, analyzed, and incorporated into a rapidly evolving understanding of the threat. Encounters with the FW-190 were not uniformly fatal, however. Many RAF pilots discovered that coordinated attacks, use of cloud cover, and altitude advantage could offset the plane's superiority. Aerial dogfights became a high-stakes chess match, where anticipation, timing, and daring often determine outcomes. Memoirs recount instances where Spitfire pilots, using teamwork and tactical ingenuity, managed to engage FW-190 successfully. Yet even these successes carried the weight of narrow margins and constant vigilance. The plane had redefined the boundaries of danger in the sky. Beyond the cockpit, the FW-190 influenced broader RAF strategy. Commanders began adjusting sortie schedules, flight paths, and escort tactics. Intelligence officers worked to track production numbers and deployment patterns, seeking to predict where the new fighter might appear next. For Bader, these operational changes were a constant challenge. He had to balance training, morale, and engagement readiness while ensuring his pilots were not overwhelmed by fear or fatigue. His approach was methodical, demanding, but effective. The human element remained central to adapting against the FW-190. Stories from a period illustrate the very human experiences behind the technical data. Pilots wrote letters home, describing the intensity of combat, the roar of engines, and the sight of FW-190s diving from clouds with deadly precision. They spoke of fear and exhilaration in the same breath, of camaraderie forged under extreme conditions, and a respect for an adversary that tested every skill they had. Bader's leadership provided a framework for these men to survive, adapt, and continue fly with confidence despite the looming threat. The FW-190 also had a strategic ripple effect beyond immediate combat. Its arrival forced changes in training programs, squadron structures, and aircraft design. Pilots began to train more rigorously in high-speed maneuvers, formation tactics, and gunnery accuracy. Lessons learned in the field influenced design tweaks in Spitfires and Hurricanes, emphasizing climb rate, armament balance, and engine performance to counter the new German fighter. The war in the air had entered a new phase, one in which technological evolution and human skill were inseparable. Bader's own approach highlighted the intersection of psychology, leadership, and strategy. He recognized that pilots' confidence and composure were just as critical as their machines. Through exercises, briefings, and in-flight mentorship, he cultivated resilience and adaptability. Pilots were encouraged to trust their instincts, observe their opponents carefully, and respond with calculated aggression. These human-centered strategies were as vital as any mechanical advantage, enabling RAF squadrons to withstand and eventually counter the FW-190 threat. By late 1941, the FW-190 had made its mark. RAF pilots who once assumed superiority in the skies had learned caution, humility, and innovation. Squadrons led by figures like Douglas Bader were now operating under new doctrines, relying on intelligence, experience, and teamwork to survive engagements that might previously have seemed routine. Encounters with the FW-190 were a crucible, refining tactics and honing skills that would carry into later stages of the war. It was a proving ground for leadership, courage, and ingenuity in the face of a formidable new adversary. Even as the FW-190 demonstrated its strengths, it also revealed that air combat remained a human endeavor. Machine performance mattered, but so did judgment, quick thinking, and the ability to read both the enemy and one's own pilots. Bader's leadership exemplified this balance. He combined technical understanding with an acute awareness of the human psyche, recognizing that fear could be channeled into disciplined action, and that courage without strategy could be reckless. It was a lesson hard learned, and one that shaped the RAF's response to the FW-190 for years to come. The early engagements also underscored a broader truth about warfare. Technology alone does not win battles. The FW-190, for all its speed and firepower, was not invincible. Pilots who studied its behavior, learned its limitations, and coordinated effectively could survive and even prevail. Yet the plane forced the RAF into a new reality, one where rapid adaptation, careful observation, and psychological resilience were essential. Every flight was a test of not only skill, but of courage and leadership under extreme pressure. In this context, the FW-190 became more than an aircraft. It became a teacher. It revealed the limits of existing tactics, challenged assumptions, and drove innovation across the RAF. Douglas Bader and his contemporaries were at the forefront of this evolution, guiding men through uncharted territory, learning from each encounter, and passing those lessons forward. The arrival of the FW-190 was a turning point, not simply because of its technical superiority, but because it demanded that human beings rise to a new level of ingenuity, cooperation, and courage. These months of 1941, filled with reconnaissance, combat reports, and adaptation, represent a defining chapter in the air war over Europe. The FW-190 forced a reevaluation of every principle the RAF had relied upon, reshaping engagements from routine patrols to life-or-death dogfights. The lessons learned in these early encounters would resonate throughout the rest of the conflict, influencing strategies, aircraft development, and the very nature of aerial combat. As pilots returned from missions, debriefed, and trained their replacements, the FW-190 remained a looming presence, a symbol of technological challenge and human resolve. Bader's guidance, grounded in experience and resilience, provided the framework for responding to this threat. His leadership ensured that fear did not paralyze, and that every sortie could be a learning opportunity. The stage was now fully set for climactic confrontations to come, where the interplay of skill, courage, and mechanical innovation would determine the fate of pilots and planes alike. The story of the FW-190 in 1941 is, therefore, a story of adaptation and human response. It is a tale of men confronting a superior machine, of leadership navigating fear and uncertainty, and of courage tested under most extreme conditions. For Douglas Bader and his squadrons, these months of tension, learning, and confrontation would define their approach to aerial warfare and ultimately shape the course of the RAF's engagement with one of the most formidable fighters of the Second World War. By late 1941, the FW-190 had established its reputation in the skies over Europe. It was no longer a rumor or a whispered threat. It was a reality that pilots and commanders could measure, analyze, and, crucially, learn to counter. Encounters with this fighter had tested the RAF in ways the Battle of Britain never had, and the lessons were hard-earned, forged in the crucible of high-altitude dogfights over the open fields of France, and along the coast where every sortie carried mortal risk. For Douglas Bader and his wing, The FW-190 presented a challenge that was as much psychological as it was tactical. Pilots were acutely aware that hesitation could be fatal. Yet, through leadership and training, fear was transformed into focus. Every climb, every turn, every dive became a calculated exercise in observation, anticipation, and execution, the human element. Courage under pressure, decision-making in a split second, now mattered as much as the specifications of the aircraft themselves. The climactic engagements began to reveal patterns. FW-190s excelled at medium-altitude combat, with rapid roll rates, devastating firepower, and a structural robustness that allowed them to sustain hits. Spitfires could compete at high altitude, and in coordinated formations, RAF pilots could exploit moments of vulnerability in the FW-190's design. But the window was narrow. Each engagement demanded precision, timing, and instinct honed by experience. Bader emphasized teamwork above all. Pilots were trained to watch each other's backs, to anticipate enemy movements, and to use every advantage offered by terrain, cloud cover, and altitude. The intensity of these dogfights tested both machines and men. Memoirs from RAF pilots recount the split-second decisions required to survive, whether to climb aggressively, dive to avoid fire, or feint and bait the enemy into overextending. The roar of engines, the flash of cannon fire, and the sudden disappearance of comrades created a tension that is almost unimaginable to those who have never flown in combat. Each sortie was a high-stakes negotiation with gravity, speed, and deadly intent. Bader's own experience continued to shape outcomes. Despite his prosthetic legs, he flew with the same daring that had earned him recognition earlier in the war. He would often lead attacks personally, demonstrating tactics and techniques that younger pilots could emulate. His leadership was not theoretical. It was proven in the sky, under conditions where hesitation or error meant death. He understood that human behavior under stress could amplify or undermine even the most brilliant tactical plan. Fear could paralyze, but courage, channeled and disciplined, could overcome even the superior performance of the FW-190. Over time, RAF tactics evolved. Pilots learned to anticipate the FW-190's climbs and dives, to attack in concerted groups rather than solo, and to exploit the slight limitations in high-altitude performance. The FW-190's power-force adaptation, pushing the RAF to innovate in ways that would strengthen its overall effectiveness. Yet even with these adaptations, every engagement carried risk, every mission was a lesson, and the threat of the FW-190 remained omnipresent. Some of the most memorable encounters illustrated the razor-thin margin between survival and disaster. Pilots would describe narrowly evading cannon fire, trading blows with an adversary at impossible speeds, and seeing comrades disappear in a flash of smoke. These experiences forged an unspoken bond among airmen, a shared understanding of danger, trust in leadership, and the necessity of absolute focus. The FW-190, for all its mechanical advantage, became a measure of courage as much as engineering. It demanded that pilots rise to a level of vigilance and skill that few peacetime experiences could replicate. Yet the FW-190's appearance also highlighted a critical truth. Human ingenuity and leadership could meet technological superiority. Bader's insistence on rigorous training, careful observation, and coordinated action allowed his wing to confront the FW-190 effectively. Pilots learned to exploit weaknesses in the enemy aircraft, such as slower acceleration in tight turns or less maneuverability at extreme angles. Intelligence reports fed tactical adjustments, while experience honed instinctual responses. What began as fear gradually transformed into strategy, and strategy into success, measured not in immediate victories, but in survival, adaptation, and preparation for future engagements. By early 1942, the FW-190 had cemented its reputation, and the RAF had begun to integrate lessons from early encounters into broader operational planning. Squadrons now approached patrols and escorts with heightened awareness, using altitude, formation, and mutual support to reduce vulnerability. The arrival of the FW-190 had forced the RAF to innovate faster, fly smarter, and respect the evolving capabilities of the Luftwaffe. It had reshaped the psychology of aerial combat, compelling pilots to navigate fear and uncertainty with discipline and courage. Douglas Bader's role in this adaptation was pivotal. His leadership, blending practical instruction, personal example, and strategic foresight, provided his men with tools to confront a superior enemy without succumbing to panic. He understood that confidence, focus, and trust among pilots were as crucial as speed and firepower. Through these efforts, the RAF gradually regained parity, demonstrating that human resolve could counter technological advantage when properly harnessed. The FW-190 would continue to challenge the RAF for years, but the early encounters of 1941 to 1942 defined the approach that allowed British pilots to survive and eventually dominate the air war. Lessons learned under fire-shaped tactics influenced aircraft modifications and informed operational doctrine. The plane itself became both a threat and a catalyst, accelerating the RAF's evolution and underscoring the inseparable link between human skill and mechanical innovation. The climax of this chapter in history is not marked by a single dogfight, but by the transformation of the RAF itself. From fear and uncertainty arose adaptation and resilience. Pilots who had faced the FW-190 emerged with heightened skill, deeper understanding, and an appreciation for the interplay of leadership, courage, and technological challenge. Bader's influence ensured that these lessons were internalized, passed down, and leveraged to secure the skies over Europe. In conclusion, the FW-190's arrival was more than an introduction of a new aircraft. It was a turning point that reshaped the air war in 1941. It tested human courage, challenged existing tactics, and demanded rapid adaptation. For Douglas Bader and his squadrons, it became a defining trial, one that revealed the importance of leadership, teamwork, and psychological resilience in the face of a seemingly superior adversary. The plane itself remained a formidable opponent, but the lessons learned from those early encounters would resonate through the RAF, shaping the course of aerial combat for the remainder of the war. The story of the FW-190 reminds us that warfare is never solely a contest of machines. It is a story of people, their ingenuity, bravery, and capacity to adapt under pressure. The sky above Europe in 1941 was a crucible, where courage met steel, and where the character men like Douglas Bader defined the outcome as much as the aircraft they flew. The FW-190 demanded respect, but also revealed the power of human determination when guided by leadership and experience. As we look back on these events, the lessons endure. Innovation changes the battlefield, but human skill and leadership shape its outcome. Pilots who flew against the FW-190, guided by figures like Bader, exemplified resilience, adaptability, and courage. Their stories are a testament to the human spirit under pressure, to the capacity to overcome fear, and to the enduring importance of insight, strategy, and cooperation in warfare. This chapter closes with the image of pilots climbing into their Spitfires, engines roaring, eyes scanning the skies, hearts steady despite the shadow of the FW-190 above. Each flight was a negotiation with danger, a test of skill, and a lesson in survival. Douglas Bader's legacy, forged in these skies, remains a beacon of leadership, courage, and the enduring human capacity to rise in the face of overwhelming odds. The FW-190 changed the air war, but it could not defeat the resolve of those who flew with purpose, skill, and determination. And as history would unfold, the lessons of 1941 to 1942 would continue to influence aerial combat, reminding us that the human element is always a decisive factor, even against the most formidable machines.